Hi, I'm Sean Kolb, Relationship Manager with Northwest Farm Credit. Thank you all for being here today. We are so proud to sponsor the Wine Symposium once again, continuing Northwest Farm Credit's long-term ongoing commitment to the Oregon wine industry. I want to congratulate OWA, OWB, and the organizing body for preparing and organizing another top-notch wine symposium. Northwest Farm Credit is part of a $320 billion national farm credit system. We're the #1 lender to agriculture and just recently turned 100 years old last year. As being connected to the Oregon wine industry since the very beginning, we've seen a number of changes and really looking forward to hearing from the panel today of the changes that they see on the horizon. Our knowledgeable staff works very hard to prepare information and share that knowledge with the industry. We invite you all to visit our booth. We've prepared a couple of interesting pieces for you to review and consider. We have a land study that breaks down each AVA. We also have a price to earnings study that we prepared looking at earnings potential on vineyard relative to total cost of development. So we like to hand it over to Bree, Education Director for OWB. Thank you, and please enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean, and thank you for all of your support. They really are indispensable in terms of their support and the knowledge that they share with the industry and myself since I've been here for the past 9 months. So welcome everyone to, I guess, the first real seminar of the symposium for 2018 and my first. What's next for Oregon wine is the subject here. And I think there will be a lot of interesting subject matter brought up and some possibly, hopefully, healthy debate and conversation and considerations coming up. I think I should invite David Adelsheim and Ken Wright up to the panel also, just to sit on the panel. I think we'll have some panel discussion throughout this as well, after speaking with Liz and Chris. So would you gentlemen, do you want to come up and sit on the panel? No introductions required.
We'll sit at the very end.
So thanks for being at this panel. I know there's a sparkling session on next door, which is very appealing, and to be honest, I'd probably be sitting in there myself if I wasn't moderating this right now. But I think we're going to have some very interesting discussion here, and hopefully you will all be able to weigh in as well. If you can download the Socio Event app onto your phones, you'll be able to engage with the panel and myself by sending questions directly to the stage. So if you're able to do that, or if you've done so already, please do that and then click into the session. And there's if you scroll to the bottom of that lecture app, then there's a series of questions that you can send in there. So starting off with this session, what's next for Oregon wine? Exploring Oregon's changing wine landscape. You see a list of suggestions on the screen up there. We will touch on all of these today. When I moved here just 9 months ago, I was aware of Oregon wine and how dynamic and exciting this state is for its production, and that's part of the attraction that brought me here. The Oregon wine landscape is unique and unlike any other in the US, and this is by design. We are fortunate in Oregon that it is still possible for us to reach out and touch the beginning of our wine culture. And really, what is wine if it's not culture? It's essentially a chemical process until we bestow culture on it. So what meanings are we giving our wine in Oregon? Oregon's wine industry pioneers developed a culture of quality, beginning with the first AVAs committing to law the highest standards in the US for regional and varietal inclusion in an AVA. This was in an effort to commit to quality production. Oregon's wine landscape today is undergoing dynamic changes with increased attention and investment coming from large commercial, domestic, and international interests. While a healthy democratization of society has led to democratization of wine, at the same time, the commercialization of modern life has led to commercialization of wine. The world needs a glass of Oregon wine in its hand. Commercialization provides regions with global relevance. However, we need to ask ourselves as a region, is this something we need to resist if we are to seek interesting, authentic, quality wine? The triumph of mass appeal over cultural authenticity. In this time of change, it is our opportunity as an industry to be forward-thinking and to continue to define our place through our commitments and our beliefs. How does Oregon continue its commitment to quality, and how do we as an industry define quality and success and differentiate and define ourselves in an increasingly commercial and competitive marketplace? The question of what's next for Oregon has been offered to a panel of industry experts. Richard Mendelson, to my left, specialist in land use law, alcohol, beverage, and intellectual property law in Napa, and is the current director of the UC Berkeley's Wine Law and Policy Program. Liz Thach, Master of Wine, and Distinguished Professor of Wine and Management at Sonoma State University. And Chris Tanghe, Master Sommelier, Director of Education with GuildSomm, and recognized as Wine Enthusiast Magazine's 2017 Sommelier of the Year. In this seminar, these experts will offer the Oregon wine industry for consideration, their industry expertise, and suggestions on the next steps for Oregon's continued success. David Adelsheim and Ken Wright will also weigh in on the subject and reveal their attempts to do this at the end of the panel as well. Richard?
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to be here and to kick off our session. I'd like to start by giving you a little bit of my wine background because, like all of you, my views have been shaped by my experiences. I received my wine education in England, drinking through the cellars at my college at Oxford University, where I was doing a graduate degree, and taking courses at the Wine and Spirit Education Trust in London. I caught the wine bug and was fortunate enough to land a job in Burgundy at Bouchardonnay Fils. My job was to take our foreign buyers around, show them all the vineyards, explain the French appellation system to them, taste the wines, and then hopefully close the deal. I returned to the States in 1980, right at the time that we were adopting a formal American appellation program. And since that time, I've been intimately involved in that, done most of the appellations in Napa, other places around California and in other states. And then I've had the fortune of working with the vintner grower groups that are formed, typically formed after the establishment of an AVA, an American Viticultural Area, to promote the area. Later, I began getting involved in appellations for other commodities, most recently cannabis. And I teach a class at UC Berkeley on appellations for all products around the world: teas, coffees, chocolates, cigars, raw and processed agricultural products, textiles, handicrafts. So through these experiences, I've learned a lot about what makes an appellation successful or those that go the opposite way and die on the vine. Could I get my PowerPoint presentation up? There we go. Perfect. Thank you. So I wanted to do three things today. I want to do a quick review of the American appellation system and its evolution to date. I want to critique the system that we've created. And then finally, and most importantly, I think for our discussion today, I want to make some recommendations for the future. So this first image with these concentric circles is just a quick visual imagery to understand how our appellation system is structured. We have on the outer circle what I call political appellations. Those are ones that had pre-existing boundaries. We didn't have to create anything. We know where states are, we know where counties are, and we know where the United States is. And you can use those, as you know, as an appellation of origin for wine if 75% of the grapes are from the designated region and the wine was fully finished in the case of a state, either in that state or in a neighboring state, or in the case of a county, if the wine was fully finished, essentially fermented and processed in the state in which the county is located. This is under federal law. I know I'm in an Oregon crowd, and you should be rightfully proud of all the steps you've taken to enhance these federal level protections, and we'll get to that next. American viticultural areas were a new creation in 1983, and they're essentially delimited grape growing areas that are established by a petition to the federal government, to TTB. You can use an AVA on a wine label if 85% of the grapes are within the named area. If you have a vineyard designation, 95% of the grapes have to be from the named vineyard inside the named AVA. And the wine has to be fully finished in the state or states in which the AVA is located. The middle bullet hole red or purple, is estate bottled. And we know estate bottled is not an appellation of origin, but it does designate that 100% of the grapes were grown in the named AVA. So these rules have been supplemented by stricter state standards, and I don't expect you to read this because you know, and we're going to focus on the first bullet, Oregon, that you have had for some time stricter than federal state law that says that if you use Oregon, the name of an Oregon county, or any AVA that's wholly located in Oregon, then 100% of the grapes must be grown in the state, and 95%, not 85% in the case of an AVA, not 75% in the case of a county, which is the federal standard, but 95% must be, of the grapes in that wine must be grown in the named area. So that's the system that was set forth in 1983. And to date, we have 240 AVAs in 32 states. I'd love to hand you all out a note card and have you write down blind how many of those you can name, because most people are not able to name even 100 of the 240, and that is because many of these literally are not known and have, quote unquote, died on the vine. And we'll explore why. Just as one last reminder about how the process works, an AVA is established by a petition to the federal government, as I stated. And for those of you who are thinking of doing an AVA, I would recommend that you look at the 28-year retrospective that TTB did on the program that resulted in this rulemaking in 2011. And they reviewed and updated the criteria for the establishment of AVAs with name evidence, boundary evidence. The main one is a distinguishing viticultural characteristics of the area in question. You have to show that the area that you're seeking to designate as an AVA is distinct viticulturally from what's outside. And probably the best indication of the evolution is when I think about the Napa Valley AVA, which was filed in 1979, established in 81, prior to the 1983 effective date of our program. That was 5 pages. The AVAs, the 11 AVAs that I filed for with vintner growers in Paso Robles, each one was over 100 pages. So we've had growing sophistication. Probably the best example of that is in climatology. When we did the Napa Valley AVA, and I'm sure when the Willamette Valley AVA was established, we were working with Amarine and Winkler's regions 1 through 5 system. Today, we have weather stations in almost every vineyard. The amount of climate data we have to analyze wind direction, speed, max temperatures, we can do a lot more. In fact, it's data overload. And it's just the game of establishing AVAs has become much more sophisticated. Sadly, I think TTB has a little bit behind the curve. In my book, Appalachian Napa Valley, I recommend that they have industry advisors, actually an advisory panel, so that they can understand the sophistication that we all live with in the vineyards and wineries. The second category that's dealt with in this rulemaking is AVAs within AVAs, otherwise known as nested AVAs. And we have a lot of examples. The Willamette Valley, with its 6 sub-AVAs or nested AVAs as an example. I mentioned the Paso Robles 11 and the Napa Valley 16 nested AVAs. This is a trend that is continuing, and it harkens back to the old world Appalachian hierarchy, where this was from the London Wine and Spirit Education Trust. It's one of the first things I learned when I was studying there, and I loved it, that I could get to know a country and a region. I could play the wine game, name game. I became a lover of Burgundy, and I could first explore the wines of the Côte de Beaune and the Côte de Nuits, and then drill down to the vineyard level. And that is, in a sense, what's happening in America. But what we recognized in the Napa Valley, and this is one of the subjects that Bree put up on her list, and I'm going to address it now. In 1989, we had established Carneros, Howell Mountain. We were working on Stag's Leap District, these nested AVAs inside Napa, and it was very obvious what was going to happen. We were going to end up with 16 or more nested AVAs. And from my time in France, what I had seen looking at the Bordelais experience was that Bordeaux became non-existent on labels of Medoc and even finer distinguished wines. You go into a wine store, please do, ask for the Bordeaux section, go to the Saint-Estèphe and the Saint-Julien and the like. You will not see the word Bordeaux on the label. You used to see Grand Vin de Bordeaux, but now you don't even see that. And this is what we, looking forward in Napa, said this is what's going to happen in the Napa Valley, and we will lose, we're at risk of losing the goodwill associated with Napa Valley if we don't require, which we do now by state law, that when you put Oakville, to give these examples, you must put in direct conjunction the word Napa Valley. This has served us very well. It's been now duplicated in Sonoma and then more recently in Paso Robles that are also going through this nested AVA evolution. I think it's a worthy, it's a time tested and true. From my perspective, it's worked for us, and I think it will work in other areas. Because remember, outside the United States, California, maybe Napa Valley is known, but Oakville really is not. So to keep the goodwill of the name that is recognized is important. Okay, quickly, critique of the system. Even though that Appalachian hierarchy slide suggested that you would go from Burgundy all the way down to Clos de Bez, which I think was the vineyard example, getting smaller each time, unfortunately, our nested AVAs, our AVA system, does not work that way. Each AVA is an AVA in its own right, and they range from Ohio River Valley, which is part of 4 states, and I have the number of square miles it is. It's huge. It's 26,000 square miles, down to Cole Ranch in California that's all of 200 acres. So it's hard with AVAs because they're all one and the same to really have that notion of a hierarchy. I think it's a fault of our system. Actually, there was a proposal made to TTB to change that. Actually, it was by Jackson Family in leading up to that 2011 rulemaking to reorient in terms of size, regional AVAs, sub-regional, the way they do it in Australia. But it fell on deaf ears. Secondly, there are no quality criteria. AVA groups love to talk about wine quality. This picture is of the Carneros Quality Alliance, now called the Carneros Wine Alliance, but it was called CQA at the time because they wanted to evoke quality in the same way that the French AOCs do through their requirements both in the vineyard and the winery. CQA did an interesting thing. I'm going to want to go to it if I can go back there. Next slide. Oh, no, it's not there. Oh, here it is. 1 second. Yes. They decided to focus on Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. They would spend their promotional money as a vintner grower group to promote those 2 varietals. And what they did is they decided each year to produce a wine that would be the benchmark for consumers of what a Pinot Noir or a Chardonnay should taste like if it comes from Carneros. And this was a blended wine made each year at a different winery. And they hired Ann Noble at the University of California at Davis. They did an organoleptic sensory evaluation of the wines. They would go to consumers and show that Carneros Pinot Noirs are in the spicy, cherry, fresh berry, and jam, not leather, earthy, and vegetal quadrant of this chart. And then the benchmark wine would demonstrate that. Now, that program only lasted for a number of years, but I think it was a worthy effort. Of course, what you see with appellations is this tension between innovation and tradition. And there's always the question of whether we know enough as a young New World country to be making those choices. I, for one, love Merlot from Carneros, if you can get it ripe in the northern part. So maybe we chose the wrong varietal, I don't know. But you can see that this is one way in which we bring meaning. So let me go back. The last critique is that we are not 100% grapes grown within the named appellation. We're either 90% or 95%, but we're not 100%. Every time I speak about this abroad, people are aghast that it's not, purity. There actually was a lawsuit on this brought by Dr. Ed, crazy Dr. Ed. He lost, saying that our appellation should be 100%, but they're not. Okay, let me move on to the third part, because this, I think, will set us up for a lively discussion that will ensue. Where do we go in the future? My number 1 bullet and the recommendation that I make in the book that I published on this called Appellation Napa Valley is that we need to focus on vineyard designations. The vineyard designation, the vineyard, is the last peel of the onion, and it's the most important. And even in cab country of Napa, we're not really the chateau model. We buy grapes and we have vineyard designations. So where these vineyards are and what they mean is very important. For one reason, the first reason is that TTB will not, I've learned this for the hard knocks of appellation petition processing, TTB is not going to continually subdivide AVAs. They would not subdivide Oakville and Rutherford into Oakville Bench and Rutherford Bench. They wouldn't subdivide Templeton Gap into Willow Creek District, which is now a side-by-side AVAs. We changed the formulation of that. It's clear to me that this is not TTB is not going to go farther. You have your 6 AVAs inside the Willamette Valley. They're not going to be subdivided further. I mean, you probably don't want that, but TTB isn't going to do it. And the consumer wants to know where vineyards are, and I think it's our obligation to tell them. I'm promoting in Napa that we form a registry. It won't be done it won't be government sponsored. We're going to get a nonprofit and experts so a consumer can go and find out where a vineyard is located. And then the producer or the grower is not going to be able to expand that name to some non-contiguous area in the future that's not part of the vineyard. There would be a registry where people look to find out where vineyards are. I think that's incredibly important and valuable information to consumers. We will not be doing a classification. That's for the press and the media, but at least for people to know where vineyards are. In terms of 3 other things in terms of future directions, I mentioned varietal focus. I think it's incredibly important as we mature as a wine-growing country. Maybe not to the point of, which I don't think could happen under federal law, where you can't grow a particular varietal in a particular area. Maybe that's to come in the future. But at least, like the CQA did in Carneros, a focus on particular varietals. I think it's important from a consumer point of view and giving added value to our appellations. People pay more for appellations wines. They deserve to get something in return. 100% grape origin. We did this in the Napa Valley. We adopted a logo that says 100% NV. People would put it on their label. If 100% of the wines, of the grapes in that wine were grown inside the Napa Valley AVA. Again, it lasted for a number of years, but didn't continue. Why? Because the New World standard for AVAs, and this is true throughout all New World wine-growing countries, is 85%. And it would some people felt it was putting them, producers, at a competitive disadvantage. So the program didn't last. I still think it's important. I think it's a sign of integrity. And Oregon has led the way with integrity all along with your stricter standards. I think it's something to consider. And then the last thing that's maybe the most exciting are certifications. Certifications, I've shown you 2 here just to give you an example, but they come in all shapes and sizes. The one on the left was the first one that I ever came across, and it is from Augusta, Missouri. Augusta was the first AVA established in America, followed by the Napa Valley. And they award a town seal. It's an owl. You see that owl? After the one, they modeled it on the French standards. You would go through a blind taste test, and if the wine showed, it's supposed to show typicité, the characteristic of that area. But that's not, I've dug into this. What these taste tests, even in France, show is that the wine's not defective. The judges really aren't trained to find typicité. That's my own view. They want to weed out defective wines, which is a worthwhile thing, and that's what really they were doing in Augusta. But to the right is one that would look like what the French call a cahier des charges, which is the list of requirements to use an AOC. Coro Mendocino, I welcome you to go check out the website. It reads, for all the chemical criteria and a taste test in Mendocino and the varietals specified. It's starting to look like a controlled appellation of origin. There are other ways of telling the consumer about your appellation. You do it here with your Yamhill Carlton embossed bottle that's reminiscent of the Chateauneuf-du-Pape embossed bottle. The certifications this is something I've learned, the certifications don't have to necessarily be about wine. They can be about anything that promotes sustainability. They can be about social conditions inside your appellation. They can be about environmental standards. Look at Lodi Rules, another good certification program. And then there's a logo on the label that informs the consumer that you, as the leaders of these appellations, are taking steps towards economic, social, and environmental sustainability. This is very important. So in conclusion, because I want to leave a lot of time for our discussion, appellations to succeed have to have strong leadership. The reason that most of those have died on the vine, of those 200 plus, is they don't have strong vintner-grower leadership. Then that leadership must take steps to justify the value add that the appellation wine's higher prices command. You must put meaning behind the name, and then you must, as we've learned in Napa, protect the name, which we do all around the world. Think about this value add concept, again, as broadly as you can. Again, it's not just controlled wine quality. It's everything to tell the consumer about what you're doing as growers and producers. From the outset of the appellation system, Oregon has led the way with its stricter rules and its general farsightedness. And in conclusion, I hope that continues. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I think I have a couple of questions up here. We're going to do 2 questions after each speaker, and then we'll let the next speaker continue. We will open it up to questions at the end also. So any questions directly from the audience? Meg?
Is there any consumer research studies shown that the consumer cares about the certifications and changes their buying patterns because of such certifications?
The studies that I'm aware of are out of Europe, where, for those of you who know, follow this general subject of appellations for other products are called geographical indications, and we call them protected denominations of origin, PDOs, and PGIs, protected geographical indications. And I use them to buy when I'm abroad somewhere, I use them to know what to buy. And you can go on the EU door and they'll tell you everything about the product. I find it very useful. But you can have information overload, which is your point. You can have too many things, and we've seen those. You know, there's so many logos on the label you can't tell. And what they've shown in Europe with the PDO and PGI labels is that over time, there is increasing you need a marketing campaign to educate consumers. There are those consumers who care and those who don't. I'm sure we have people in the audience who've drilled down in more detail, but you know, in part, appellations are for aficionados. I mean, let's face it. And the aficionados care. When I do in my class at Berkeley, we always taste every product. I mean, when it's textiles, we're looking, we're not tasting. But whether it's chocolates or teas or coffees. And sometimes the students oftentimes can't tell the difference. We always bring in a generic, and then we bring in the real product. And I say, if you can't tell the difference, either there is no difference, or you just don't have a sophisticated enough palate to know the difference. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think that's the right question. I hope I've addressed in part your question.
One more from the audience. Actually, there's 2 more. The TTB allowed the Ribbon Ridge sub-AVA within the Chehalem Mountain AVA. Do you think others will be allowed, or is that...
I don't think so. I can see certain exceptions, but let me just tell you where TTB is at in this, because they don't like nested AVAs because they don't understand them. How can the Willamette Valley be distinctive compared to what's outside of it And then inside of it, there's yet another distinction. Doesn't that mean that the Willamette Valley was wrongly established in the first place? This is the question I get from TTB. So if we're going to establish one of the sub-AVAs or nested AVAs, we must have made a mistake. And I go to TTB and I say, no, it's not like that. We're all Homo sapiens in this crowd, but we have men and women. You can drill down on focal length of a telescope, and it doesn't mean that we're not Homo sapiens. So, but I think the general level of understanding and sophistication at TTB about these differences, they need more help. Maybe with more help they'll get there, but AVAs have never been their first priority. So I don't think we're going to see many more, certainly not down to the vineyard level. Not going to happen.
And I think this next question actually could, sorry, Chris, you're going to?
Yeah, I do have a question for Richard, actually. Have you seen in the history of the TTB granting AVAs, was there a time when there was kind of a windfall of AVAs and they said, maybe we need to be a little more strict or discerning as to whether or not we're going to be awarding AVAs? I mean, has there been a clear progression of that, or has it been really administration dependent and kind of who's in charge of that?
Not administration dependent, interestingly, except the ones that end up being decided at higher in Treasury or even elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Most of them are done at the bureau level. The original AVAs were all very large, and TTB had an expansionist logic. Anybody who was outside who wanted in, who could make a colorable claim to be included, largely was included. Then we started the nested AVAs, and there were more battles over inclusion or exclusion, because the results in terms of the value of your land and the value of the wine would cause people to fight. And I think when people at TTB saw this trend to get smaller and smaller in these battles over boundaries, they started to be surprised. I don't think TTB at the outset ever thought there would be nested AVAs, because they're not wine people. Anybody who's a wine person would know there were going to be nested AVAs. You follow that old world hierarchy. So I think they've been surprised and just tried to keep up. They're trying to do as good of a job as they can.
I think I see your next career move, maybe. Moving to TTB.
To government? No, thank you.
Excellent. Let's save the next questions for the rest of the panel discussion later. Liz, would you like to come up and present?
Right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I love coming to Oregon, and the snow is a special treat. It's the first time I've seen snow in Oregon. And I have to say, about a week and a half ago, I was down in Ashland, and it was 70 degrees, visiting the southern Oregon wineries. So Bree invited me to talk about the lessons from Sonoma County, because Richard was here to talk about how smart Napa Valley was. And Sonoma Valley is smart too, but it took them a little longer. And I live in Sonoma, but I go to Napa almost 2 or 3 times a week. So I consider myself from both Napa and Sonoma. But I want to talk about the conjunctive labeling process that Sonoma County went through, because I understand that several parts of Oregon are looking at doing that. And also a little bit about joint marketing with AVAs, vineyard designates. And I'm going to start a new topic, which I believe our next speaker is going to pick up on too, which is the importance of entry-priced regional wines. So I moved to Sonoma County in the year 2000, and if you look at the map here, you can see Sonoma and Napa County are all nestled next to each other, all cuddly and happy. But it wasn't always that way. In fact, when I first moved there in 2000, there was a little bit of a rivalry between the two counties. In fact, Napa was considered to be the socialites, the polite, gentle people, and Sonoma were considered to be rebels, individualists, cowboys and cowgirls who didn't really want to get along. And in fact, there was even a little jealousy between the two counties You might have heard of the Sonoma Valley Wine Patrol. They were a group of Sonoma County vintners who dress up like cowboys. And probably their most famous thing was when they hijacked the Napa Valley wine train and boarded and took the wine glasses away from the consumers, dumped the Napa Valley wine out, and poured Sonoma County wine in the glasses. And the main reason they did this is because they thought Napa Valley wine was just too expensive. So that was back then when I first moved here. But now today, believe it or not, Napa and Sonoma are really, really close collaborative partners and both equally successful. And in fact, here's a quote from both NVV and Napa Valley Vintners and Sonoma County Vintners. "We are good for one another. We need and support each other." And in fact, both counties are so crowded with tourists that and there's a differentiation factor in terms of Napa focuses on Cabernet Sauvignon and Sonoma focuses on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, even though they both make lots of different types of wine as well, with 1,000 wineries between both of them. But let's go back in time. In the year 2005, 2006, so it took a while for Sonoma County to get conjunctive labeling passed. The situation was a little bit dire. There were 13 AVAs. Today there are 18. And many had separate marketing associations that were really good at their job. And in fact, they were so good that Sonoma County was not being promoted at all. There was no conjunctive labeling. Nobody was putting Sonoma County on their labels unless it was a Sonoma County wine with 75% of the grapes from there. But Russian River and Sonoma Valley and all those AVAs ended up becoming a lot more well-known to consumers. And also at the same time, the grape growers were looking across the border at the prices that Napa was getting and they were not getting. And it was the grape growers who really came together as a force and approached the vintners suggesting conjunctive labeling. So what they did then is they ended up funding 2 consumer surveys in the next 2 years, and there were national surveys of wine consumers in America, and they actually discovered that consumers, the number one place they knew, of course, was Napa, but they did know Sonoma, and they actually knew Sonoma more than the individual AVAs. So then what happened is the vintners and the grape growers started working together, and they went out to each of the individual AVA associations, and they said, here's the data. Consumers see Sonoma County as the overarching region here. Let's consider conjunctive labeling. So it took a lot of conversations. At the same time this was happening, there were some collaborative changes in the organization level. They created what's called the TRIO. And this was a partnership between Sonoma County Tourism, who was sort of off doing its own thing, and the vintners and the grape growers who created a new commission and taxed themselves to help fund this. And then the county of Sonoma created a new tourism tax structure, and they gave the money to these 3 groups to work together. In fact, it worked so well that all 3 different organizations literally moved into the same building together, leased the same building, so they were working together every day. And they ended up using the money then to partially fund the AVAs. So with all of this new collaboration and new funding, finally, Sonoma County was able to come up with a logo. And granted, there were some screaming and yelling and fighting, but eventually they came up with this very simple but highly effective logo of just the stamp, the brand saying Sonoma County. And now that is on everything. So what they did then is they created this joint marketing program. And so this is the tourism website, but all of the sites, the vintners, the grape growers, and the tourism all use the logo on everything. They created an incredible digital marketing strategy. If you go to the websites, there's amazing videos and lots of suggested tours. They even have tours that are suggested by grape varietal. So if you love Gewürztraminer, these are the wineries that produce Gewürztraminer and so forth. So it's very helpful to the consumer. Lots of different events throughout the year. There's an event every single month in Sonoma County bringing tourists back. Barrel auction. Sonoma in the city is where they all go out together. And this is, again, the grape growers and vintners and tourism working together going out to cities across the nation to bring Sonoma wine. There's international tours. They bring in the Somms every year, the big Sommelier Summit. Sorry, I'm having a hard time wrapping my mouth around French this morning. But Sonoma County distinguishes itself based on its food. It has some of the most prestigious food products in the nation that Michelin restaurants chefs ask for, such as the Sonoma Liberty Duck and the Rocky Rooster and the CFK lamb and so forth. Lots of different, there's a rabbit too that they're known for. Media tours, and then again, still funding the individual AVAs. So everybody's working together now. Probably one of the best things they did, though, is they created this Certified Tourism Ambassador program. So not only did all the tasting room employees get certified in hospitality and greeting visitors and welcoming them to Sonoma County, but everybody in the hotel and restaurant industry as well. So there was the same consistent message welcoming visitors to Sonoma County and asking them to come back again. So this was an investment that they, it was a 4-hour certification program and training that was offered free to anybody in hospitality. So this is what happened with the conjunctive labeling process. Through all of this sort of energy and enthusiasm and collaboration, they eventually found a legislative partner to carry the bill to the state legislature. That's how it works in California. And so it's important to find somebody who's going to carry the bill for conjunctive labeling. And the other key thing they did was the vintners and the wine growers made sure that they got some of the large wineries on board, wineries with good legal teams, okay? You need some lawyers, right, Richard, to make this happen. Now, there was still a little grumbling from the AVAs, but most of them were pretty much on board by this time to do conjunctive labeling. There was a little bit of opposition from the California Wine Institute. But despite that, the bill passed in 2011. At the same time, Sonoma County wisely decided not to make it mandatory until January 1st, 2014. And this was wise because it allowed the wineries to have time to plan and change their labels to make sure that, you know, Sonoma County went on the label under the AVA. And again, the TTB approves this, and the ABC enforces it. And really, what Sonoma County did is they gave a lot of leeway and creativity to the wineries in terms of where they put Sonoma County on the label. You can see from this example here that the little stamp is off in the corner, and Sonoma Coast is the AVA. It can also just be written Sonoma County underneath the AVA. It just has to be somewhere on the label, and it has to be at a certain font size. So, as Bree mentioned, I work at Sonoma State University in the Wine Business Institute, and our specialty is research on consumers and marketing. And so we conducted some pre and post consumer surveys to test the effectiveness of conjunctive labeling in Sonoma County. We had actually done one survey in 2008, national survey of 409 consumers, asking them, again, these questions: how well do you know these AVAs, how well do you know Sonoma County? And then we waited 2 years after conjunctive labeling was mandatory, which was 2014, so we waited until 2016 and we did a second survey. And so we found a huge difference in terms of statistics. It was significant in terms of the recognition of both Sonoma County and the AVAs went up. We were surprised at this. We didn't think that they would both go up, but they both went up. Showing that the conjunctive labeling was a huge success for Sonoma County. But there's also more data proving this. We looked at tourism revenues between 2006 and 16, and the lodging occupancy levels nearly doubled. Tax revenues for tourism increased by 59%, but probably the most impressive number is the tourism revenue number of $1.93 billion in 2016, which, believe it or not, is just a little bit higher than Napa in 2016. So, and then also Sonoma County now, since this, has won a lot of wine tourism regional awards. So I'm not going to read through this quote, but basically it's talking about how everybody coming together and working together, even though Sonoma County were rebels and individualists and cowboys and cowgirls, they finally decided to work together, and it made a huge difference in terms of consumer market and brand recognition. So I did want to spend just a few minutes on vineyard designates, because a couple years ago I published a book called Call of the Vine, Exploring Famous Vineyards of Napa and Sonoma. And I love old historic vineyards. And I know you have a lot of wonderful ones here in Oregon as well. In fact, I visited one in May in the Willamette. But in my research, I discovered that this was the list of vineyards that was provided to me in Napa and Sonoma. And if you look through this list of vineyards, probably most of you don't know them or haven't heard of them. And I have Tocolon on the Napa side and Monte Rosso on the Sonoma side highlighted because those are probably the two that have done the best job of marketing themselves. So I think vineyard designates are important, and I think they're especially of interest to the sophisticated wine connoisseur. But they definitely, just like an AVA, a vineyard designate needs to be branded, it needs to be promoted. And so looking at the story of Tocolon, I think, is a good way of what Beckstoffer did to promote that vineyard and get really, really high grape prices for it is an amazing story. Then the last thing I wanted to talk about is this entry-priced regional wine story. When I told Bree about this, she said, you should share this with the group and see what they think. So last fall, 2016, I spent 3 months in Burgundy on my sabbatical. It was tough job to go work in Burgundy for 3 months and interview a whole bunch of winemakers and owners and all the domains. That was my research project. And one of the things that surprised me when I was interviewing them was their concern over about high prices and making sure that Burgundy as a region had entry-priced regional wines. And they're concerned that if their prices go too high, they'll get priced out of the market. And they want to make sure that new, younger wine consumers can continue to find them around the world. And so part of the structure they set up, and this is from the BIVB, these are the current percentages, is this quality pyramid, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And it might surprise you that 51% of the wine coming out of Burgundy is regional. It's a Bourguignon Blanc and Bourguignon Rouge and wonderful Cremants. And in Europe, you can buy a great Cremant for €6, and you can go to Trader Joe's and buy a Cremant de Bourguignon for $9.99. And a little bit more for the Rouge and Blanc, but still less than $20 a bottle. And this is important to them to have this brand recognition that is accessible, and also is accessible not only in grocery stores, but in restaurants and by the glass at a price that's reasonable. And then if you look above that, you have the village or commune level, which is 37%. And in a way, we might be able to compare that to our AVAs here in America. But the vineyard designates, the Premier Cru and Grand Cru vineyards of Burgundy is only 12% of the pyramid. Of course, it's the most expensive wine in the world. Wine Searcher, I always love Wine Searcher, and I looked up these prices. Their most recent price for Romani Conti from Domaine Romani Conti was $17,502 a bottle on average. So that's the Burgundy pyramid. So when I started looking at this, I started thinking, well, how does the Burgundy pyramid apply to Sonoma? And I started looking at it, and Sonoma, too, has a lot of regional entry-priced wine. There's Sonoma County AVA, Rodney Strong, Kendall Jackson, Kenwood, St. Francis. These wineries make sure that Sonoma County wine is affordable and on every shelf in every grocery store across the nation, and is available in glasses by the glass in restaurants and wine bars, and this is important. We also have a lot of ultra-premium wineries, and then of course we have the top of the pyramid, which I'm saying luxury is 100 plus. And according to Wine Searcher, the most expensive wine in Sonoma County is Marcus and Chardonnay from the Sonoma coast at $3.96 a bottle. So then I thought, well, let me look at Napa. Napa, too, has the same pyramid structure. Robert Mondavi, BV, Martini, Hess, these are all wineries that make sure that Napa Valley or county wine is available out there for the consumer to purchase at a reasonable price. Napa, of course, has a lot more ultra-premium, And luxury was Screaming Eagle at the top of their pyramid at $3,457 a bottle as of last night on Wine Searcher. I should mention that I did talk with Robert Mondavi and Martini, and they're telling us that due to the high prices of their vineyard land and so forth, it's getting difficult for them to ensure that glass of wine doesn't go over $18 in a restaurant, but they're trying. So I went and looked at Oregon. And I found that you have a lot of wonderful ultra-premium and luxury-priced wines. And the top of your pyramid is, according to Wine Searcher, Domaine Serene Monogram Pinot Noir at $320 a bottle. But I wasn't as successful at finding regional wines at the bottom of your pyramid. I know there's a couple out there, and so I think this is something that should be considered. Right now, you're the fastest growing in terms of volume and value, but your circle on Danny Breger's chart is small, 1% of the market. So if you want to grow the market share, maybe you don't, but if you do, there is some room there for looking at more regional wines as well as keeping your pristine luxury-priced and ultra-premium wines safe in their AVAs. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. Any questions from the audience on this one? Angela.
Just on that last slide for Oregon, did you have any percentages on, is it like 90% of us in ultra premium and 10% in luxury, or do we have any breakout?
No, I don't have the exact percentages, but it is, Oregon wine in general is generally, above $20 in bottle with some exceptions. The prices are more expensive, and that makes sense. Your vineyards are small, wineries are small, but it's something to consider.
Do you think the consumer cares if it's Oregon appolated or Willamette Valley appolated in that regional bottom of the pyramid?
Very good question. So, as Richard mentioned, and I've found in my research as well.
Yeah, can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, the question was, does the consumer care if it's Oregon appellated or Willamette Valley? Or you have, 18 AVAs? You've got a lot of AVAs in Oregon, so which, does the consumer care? And what we found is that most consumers, the everyday, consumer, I'm not talking about the wine connoisseur or the wine enthusiast, don't know the AVAs. They just don't know, but they know Oregon. So I would make sure that you have Oregon, and I think you're going to talk more about this, is available in restaurants by the glass at a price that's less than $20 a glass, if possible, and that it's available in the grocery stores and supermarkets across this country. So Oregon becomes more of a recognized as a brand in the consumer's mind. Now, Willamette Valley is also well known, but I actually don't know that you can. The price of grapes in Willamette's getting pretty high too. So I don't know if you're going to be able to do that or not. But it's something that perhaps we can have David and Ken address as well.
There's a question that's come through on the app. If the entry-level wines are not representative of the quality and characteristics of the more expensive wines, how does it help the category?
That's a very good question. So an entry-level wine, like they say, go back to Burgundy again. The wine needs to be clean, more fruit-forward. It just does need to have some typicity, but it just needs to be something that is pleasant to taste for that entry-level price point that's going to bring people into the category, and then you slowly start moving the consumer up the quality pyramid to higher prices.
Liz, you touched on it just a second ago, but if grape pricing is becoming restrictive, is there any damage in making it a blended wine? Is Bourgogne Rouge or Bourgogne Blanc, are they a 100% Chardonnay or Pinot Noir, or?
Oh, very good question. Yes, so no, of course not. Aligoté is one of the big grapes of Burgundy. People always forget that Beaujolais is part of Burgundy too, so Gamay. And there's a few others as well, but no, I think the regional brand, it needs to be good, clean, fruit-forward wine that's accessible, And but it doesn't need to be from the major grape from the region. Like you have Pinot Gris here in Oregon as well, and you're starting to do more Chardonnay, and so yeah, it just needs to say Oregon on the label and be delicious.
Chris, can I toss that question to you as well about
the necessity for having regional wines, or
and varietals?
Yeah, I think when I think of Oregon, and granted, I'm in the business, I'm not an average consumer, but of course I think of Pinot Noir, increasingly thinking of Chardonnay, of course think of Pinot Gris, but there's so many other exciting varieties for me that are growing here as well. I've tasted some amazing Cabernet Franc, Syrah, Riesling, I think is an incredible variety for the state and for the region, for Willamette Valley in particular. And so I think Oregon has done and Willamette Valley has done a really great job in marketing Pinot Noir, and that's phenomenal, but I think that you also need to embrace these other varieties, and they're a great way to introduce people to the identity of what Willamette Valley is and can be in the future. And also, when you have varieties that aren't the kind of hallmark, say, of Pinot Noir, generally fruit prices are lower because they're being planted in areas that are not as suitable for Pinot Noir, and you can produce those regional wines much more with much more approachability, and not as cost incurring. So that is passed down to your average consumer. And at the end of the day, if they're going to drink Willamette Valley something, yeah, it may be Pinot Noir, but would it be so bad if it's a glass of Riesling or a glass of delicious Gamay? No, right? It just has to be delicious. And preferably gulpable, okay? You can have it with food or not, but the idea is to get something in their glass and introduce Willamette Valley to them. So that's just my opinion, but coming from a restaurant perspective, that diversity would be extremely beneficial for the region and also for the wine director creating that program.
And in terms of blends, Pinot Noir, Gamay blend, for instance, Pas du Grand in Burgundy?
Yeah, why not? I mean, they're related. They go well together. I wouldn't call it Pas du Grand personally. One, it's hard to say. Yeah. Sounds fancy if you can say it right? But for the average guest reading the menu, it's difficult. In addition, I think that you want to start building your own clear identity as Oregon, as Willamette Valley. You often in the past, you've compared yourselves to Burgundy, which, to be perfectly frank, is really inaccurate in my opinion, because yes, you grow the same variety, varieties in some cases, but everything else is completely different, okay? And you don't need to do that. You're great on your own, all right? So please stop doing that. Please, all right?
Could we ask the writers to do it first?
Yeah. Let's do it, yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
In terms of conjunctive labeling, Southern Oregon's most planted grape variety is also Pinot Noir. Is there a place in the national market for Southern Oregon Pinot Noir? Is it just Oregon Pinot Noir?
Who are you asking?
Chris?
I mean, I'll weigh in real quickly and I'll let someone else talk because you're going to have to listen to me for a bit in a moment. Anyways, I think, again, it kind of depends on your audience, right? But I think to promote Oregon first and foremost is an awesome step. If you can get people on board with being more specific with, say, Willamette Valley or somewhere from the south, or even with a nested sub-AVA, that's a bonus, that's a win, right? But really the goal, again, is to get people turned on to Oregon. So I don't think it's as imperative as we all want it to be. You know, I'm a wine nerd. I love all the specificity of these nested AVAs and these proposed AVAs that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But how viable is that for the bulk of people that buy the wine? I don't know. I'm not an economist. I do work with the public often, but I would say it's not top of the list. I would say delicious wine is top of the list.
Excellent. Well, on that note, I think I'll let you come up and talk, and then I'll come
Okay.
back to the quality and questions.
Help me out, guys. Come on. All right. So what I wanted to focus on, this being kind of what's new and hip and changing and challenging and all that good stuff. In Oregon, I wanted to focus on the new proposed AVAs a little bit. One, because I wanted to be brought up to speed for my own education, and I do a lot of education myself, and so we're actually going to be doing a master class on the Willamette Valley again this year for the Guild Sommeliers, or GuildSomm, as we call ourselves, and I would like to start talking about these things. I don't know if they're going to be passed or not, and Richard probably has a better insight to that than I do. Some things that you mentioned before were a little bit concerning with the TTB kind of not being on board with dividing up AVAs much further. So that's what most of these AVAs I'm talking about today are. So we'll see where that goes. There's that factor. There's also the factor of with a change of administration and budgets and all sorts of things, the TTB is moving at a slower than the normal snail's pace that it normally does, okay? So I'm going to be talking about 4 different AVAs today, and the first of which that was quote-unquote perfected in its application was perfected in July of 2015, okay? And it's still not passed. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with these, and we'll see what the future holds for defining these from, again, like I said earlier, from a wine nerd perspective, which I most definitely am a wine nerd. I appreciate that defining factor that, especially nowadays, they're focusing more, these petitions are focusing more on soil and on climate, whereas I feel like that was taken into consideration before, but maybe wasn't as fully researched as it is being today. And that's clearly demonstrated with Richard's comments on, the first petitions are 5 pages and now they're well over 100. And I perused through all of these petitions myself for these proposed sub-AVAs of the Willamette Valley. And they're really impressive with, yes, the climate data, the soil research, all of that stuff. And that's why I don't have slides for you, because I would put you all to sleep with like wind charts and soil graphs and things like that. But what I wanted to do is just kind of go over the basics of these. And I wanted to quickly thank Luis Aponzi, Jeff Havlin, Rudy Marchese, and Brad Ford for all taking the time to kind of explain it to me and decipher that huge document that they also did send to me, which was helpful, but really to kind of distill it down to get an idea of what these AVAs are all about. So forgive me if you're already familiar with these, but I think it'll be good for the majority of us to kind of understand what's being proposed and what could possibly happen and why it's being done, right? There always has to be a why, and in order to make it valid. And I think that some of these are valid, but we'll see if the TTB can get on board or not. So I'll start with the most recently proposed and work my way down from there. So the most recently proposed is the Laurelwood sub-AVA that is nested into the Chehalem Mountain AVA. Okay, this is being proposed by the Ponzi family, and this is a really large portion of the current Chehalem AVA, right, which is all based on what's called a Laurelwood loess series of soil, okay, which is a combination of basalt and loess. Loess is simply decomposed basalt that's really, really fine, okay, almost like kind of like talcum powder. So in some areas there is deep deposits of loess over harder basalt, and others it's quite shallow. Louis said that really can taste the difference after the vine has seen some age and the roots are deep enough to grow through that loess and then hit the basalt. The wines get much more powerful, darker fruited. They tend to ripen about a week later here as a result of being really far north. Okay, so I don't know if you've seen that amazing soil map that Oregon has created for the Willamette Valley, but it really clearly delineates, Missoula flood material versus basalt versus sedimentary, et cetera, which is pretty neat. So the other defining factor here is the elevation. So there is plantings all the way up to 1,200 feet, which is definitely unusual for Willamette Valley in that the appellation starts at 200, but it really tops out at 1,000 because often ripeness can't be achieved, or maybe it's too challenging to achieve that ripeness. But here it's being done, and it's a pretty awesome spot for sparkling wines and things like that. And with the addition of climate change, which is real, despite whatever people are telling you, 98% of scientists agree it's real, that is something that is taken into consideration too for future generations and the future of Willamette Valley, right? What's interesting too about this proposal is that because it takes such a large chunk of the current Chehalem AVA, there's a couple kind of strips that are on different soil types that would have to be then proposed as a new AVA. Okay, so that further complicates things. And I'll let David speak to this a little bit. A basalt bench and then Parrot Mountain would be the other one that's on the other side of 99. So this whole area is kind of tucked closer up to Portland, if you're not familiar, and is. It's exciting to see that. You can see it clearly on that soil map, right, of the differences in soils, and there's definitely validity to this. And I think the elevation, for me, in my studies around the wine world, is definitely a key defining factor. Okay. After that, let's see. The next most recent is the Mount Pisgah Polk County sub-AVA, which is much further south, kind of the opposite end of the valley. And it's just about 2 miles southeast of Dallas. So we're south of Salem here, and we're south of the Van Duzer corridor. All right, and so as a result, this area is much more protected than, say, the proposed Van Duzer corridor that I'm going to talk about in a minute, or much more protected than the Eola Amity Hills appellation, which really feels the effects of that, and I have a little bit of data to show you the difference there. But because this is more protected, there's also some elevation due to Mount Pisgah. You can get up to about 835 feet for viable plantings. That really are the defining factors, okay? Also, they have a fair amount of marine sedimentary. So we see other sub-appellations like Ribbon Ridge is a great example of that, and that's probably the most accurate as far as the recent sub-AVAs, as far as defining soil type, where it's almost exclusively marine sedimentary. There's some of that here, but there's also some basalts as well. Moving on from there, we have Tualatin Hills, which is heading back up north again, which is kind of abutting the Chehalem Mountains AVA and also the proposed Laurelwood AVA. And I know there was some discussion back and forth between those two proposals to identify what is what. And so again, this is based on Laurelwood. It's an area that has about 1,000 acres planted currently, a little bit less, but is a much bigger footprint at 144,000 acres of potential plantable area. And it's kind of a horseshoe shape that follows the Tualatin River watershed. So again, focusing on that Missoula, Laurelwood, Luss. So I think that there's a lot yet to be discovered in this area, along with other certain sub-AVAs, and especially with the last one, which I think is the most clearly identifiable as being vastly different from the other AVAs, which is the Van Duzer corridor. It's also, again, been perfected since July of 2015. But for me, when I taste the wines from these sites, I always notice this slightly different character. And for me, it's really built some typicity in that it's much, much cooler, okay? Mainly because of that Van Duzer corridor. So if you're not familiar, the Van Duzer corridor is a break in the coastal range that allows a lot of wind and cooler weather to come in from the Pacific. That's really, really super beneficial for maintaining acidity, and really creates wines of typicity that are definitely more focused on that acid. And for me, that's kind of exciting, especially with the changing climate landscape. And this area has in the documents that I read has on average twice the wind speed of any other of Eola Amity or of McMinnville, which is just to the north. So that's really significant, and that all really translates into lowering the degree days and the average temperature. And so as a result, I think the wines are showing typicity and a clear defining difference. Now on these other sub-AVAs, I can't comment enough because I don't have the tasting experience to say so, if I've noticed typicity or not. But I can say by looking at the data, yes, there is viable and valid info here in order to become even more specific. Now, the question I want to pose to the panel and to you is that we see that there's proof in the science here, okay? But now that we see this and all of our geeky insides get excited and we're like, yeah, how do we translate this to the consumer? You know, how do we make this accessible? And where is Oregon now? Where is Willamette Valley now with communicating the already established AVAs, some that have been around for a fair amount of time now? So, I mean, is it fair to say that we can make this happen and that this is a good idea? Yes, from a geeky perspective. From a consumer's perspective, I don't know. Everyone who likes wine generally likes Burgundy, right? And they're all pretty familiar with how Burgundy works, and we had the whole breakdown from these guys. But is Oregon there yet? Oregon doesn't have the advantage necessarily of time, right? But I think it's important to plan ahead and to create that environment, especially with everyone's access to information, is really, really key to set yourself up properly for the future, to make that more accessible and then start making that identity now. But I guess what I'm trying to say in a really roundabout way is, how do we communicate that clearly, and how do you sell those wines while at the same time maintaining approachability with regional wines and all that kind of good stuff too? Because with all that specificity comes additional costs and all that kind of stuff. So that's a really broad question, I know, but I want to pass it down to these guys.
So, as an on-trade buyer for much of your career, do you feel like the Oregon story or the Willamette Valley story or the Nested AVA's story is being told effectively by those in the market selling the wine? Are they telling the AVA story, or are they telling a brand story which then doesn't translate into AVA?
Yeah, so my experience, which has been largely in restaurants, but also in distribution and now in education, there are certain AVAs that have done a really good job of telling that story. Dundee probably being top of the list, right? With the story
I beg to differ.
Good. That's good. I want you to differ. All right.
Yeah.
But the story of Jory, to me, was probably the most clearly communicated in my experiences in those various realms. But Ken, please weigh in. What would you?
No, I would beg to differ. I think that each AVA, the biggest issue, and I think Richard is correct, that it comes down in the end to leadership.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have people that are willing to carry the flag, not just for themselves, but for their region continuously. I frankly was shocked when we created the AVAs in 2000, started that process. In fact, the Laurelwood was part of the at that time we had it split initially into three. Chehalem was three areas. Mm-hmm. It was the sedimentary, it was volcanic, and the loess. It was three. In the end, it was combined, and for reasonable reasons. I understand that. But what shocked me, and the biggest issue we had was that everyone, the largest negative comment was that no one's going to care. They don't even know where Oregon is, or Willamette, much less these small AVAs. I was shocked at how quickly, within 2 years, I was seeing AVA on the wine list. I was seeing Yamhill Carlton, by the way, Yamhill Carlton, on the lists of
Can
restaurants.
we say that again? Yamhill Carlton.
And yes, I wrote it, whatever. So, but I was seeing Yamhill Carlton, I was seeing Dundee, I was seeing Ribbon Ridge, Chehalem on wine lists. Mm-hmm. The trade bought in actually quite quickly. They were hungry to know the differences. They bought in very quickly, and the public began asking. It's pretty shocking to me how quickly. I mean, I really didn't think it would take hold for 10 to 20 years. It was far quicker than that. It was amazing. Now, we do also, granted, we have very limited resources financially compared to Sonoma or Napa. Very limited, but no one, I think, speaks to their region better than we do. I think that there's a lot of power in our passion for our area, and it's felt, and it's real. It's not just marketing, it's quite real, and it's carried us a long way.
I'd like to clarify the TTB side of this, if I may.
Please.
The TTB attitudes, I started by saying you're shaped by your experiences. Napa Valley is 400,000 acres. Paso Robles was 650,000. Willamette Valley is 3.3 million acres. Starting to look, in my world, more like a North Coast, Central Coast, South Coast, which of course we've divided. So I think the size will determine what TTB does. And importantly, the degree of controversy. And maybe your AVAs aren't controversial. In my neck of the woods, they're very controversial. And it causes, in fact, TTB's expansionist logic of letting people in caused me, in all of my recent petitions, to file them all at once. I don't trust them to develop a context that's meaningful. So when we did Paso Robles, we did the entire area in 11 AVAs. If they were going to change one line, they had to justify it in terms of what it would do to the AVAs on both sides. I think that's the way you get context, because without context, AVAs are meaningless. And
that's what Lodi's doing in this.
And Lodi did the same thing. The last point is, don't worry, Chris, it took us 7 years in Paso Robles, so 3 years wait is nothing.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm new to the whole, you would know more than me, but I look at that and I'm like, wow, that's a really long time, right? And then you talk to these people that are submitting and they're like, just waiting and waiting and waiting when I was told this. So yeah, it's curious. I don't mean to sound, I hope I didn't come across as sounding negative about it. I'm just asking, where are we going from here? How are we going to communicate that? And I think that's not, I don't expect anyone to have an answer to that. What I expect is just to have people start thinking about it and to plan for that, because it's going to be a challenge in the marketplace. It's already, the market is already so competitive, so we just need to be constantly thinking about that. How are you going to define these things? How are you going to communicate them? How are you going to make them successful so that they don't die on the vine? That's all I'm simply. Yeah.
Chris, do you mind if I jump in here? I
Go
just
for it.
spent the last 5 years being on the Petaluma Gap AVA committee. I helped write part of the petition for that. And it was interesting. It took us such a long time to get it approved. But by the end there, even the TTB was saying, it's about time you guys applied. We've been waiting for you because we've been talking about it for such a long time. But now, Ken, we're in the situation where, okay, now we got it. We better start marketing it. We better start doing something about it. It's actually very few wineries and a lot of growers that are in that AVA. But we found that especially the somms and the wine enthusiasts and connoisseurs are very interested in AVAs, and they look for them on restaurant lists, and they're willing to pay that extra money. But it is important though to get them out there and talk about them and do tastings and talk about how they're different. And I have to applaud both of you for the fabulous AVA tasting we did in Willamette Valley in May when the MW tour came through, and we were able to clearly distinguish, like you were talking about, Chris, a typicity and differentiation for each of those AVAs in Pinot Noir for, what was it, the 2013 vintage? 2010 vintage, yeah, 2010 vintage, yeah. So, there definitely is interest from a certain consumer segment in this, and fortunately that's a consumer segment that usually is willing to pay a lot of money too, so that's helpful.
Yeah, I think there are less challenges for on-premise or on-trade, whatever term you want to use, for sure. There's more and more investment going into beverage programs, because really at the end of the day, that's one of the most profitable programs for a restaurant, right? As we all know, the restaurant business is extremely, extremely difficult, and I'm really proud that it's kind of come around to have the beverage program more valued. And I think, of course, everyone's on board with Oregon because the quality is insane, especially for the short amount of time that the region's been making wine, right? I think where the challenges with these new proposals and new nested things AVAs will come in, as far as it will be off-premise, and how do you get that across to the general public faster? You do that through on-premise, right? And then that trickles down to off-premise. You go into a restaurant, have an amazing bottle of Laurelwood, designated Pinot Noir in a restaurant, and then you go to a retail shop and you say, I want that, right? That's how it ends up working. But is there a way that you can be more effective in approaching the off-premise or not? I don't know. It's tough. It's tough. I worked in distribution for 2 years. It was the hardest job I ever had in my entire life. Okay. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. But it's really, really challenging. And again, I don't expect anyone to have an answer. I don't have an answer. It's just something I want you to think about. Any questions for me, Bree, or am I?
She's got a big list on her.
Oh gosh! All right, I'm
Let's go to the.
not free yet. All right, fire away. Fire away.
I have a question here. To my knowledge, in Oregon, we have 2 AVAs which extend across the state border into Washington. We have
Yeah.
the Gorge AVA. We also have the Walla Walla AVA, which comes into a part of Oregon, including the remarkable little rocks area, Sub AVA, which extends in there. And my question is, how does this complicate problems of classification, of labeling, of marketing, given that many of the wineries within these regions will source not only from one side of the border, but also on the other side of the border? You can't call it an Oregon wine if a good part of it's from Washington, right? So you would just call it Columbia Gorge AVA, but I don't think they do that. I'm just throwing that out for discussion.
Yeah.
Well, it caused quite a stir at TTB. And now, because whose rules do you abide by, which state? In Napa, when our first crossover, partial overlap, we call them, AVA was Carneros. And that caused its own stir. And then after that, we went back to Washington so many times and said we want no more AVAs that cross over county lines, not state lines, because all the mountains on the west side, Spring Mountain, Diamond Mountain, they go over, right? They go they go both sides, and we insisted and have prevailed because the logic was that it's too confusing. It's too confusing for consumers. They don't know where the wine comes from. And particularly if the crossover, it's not exactly like yours, but say if Spring Mountain went on the Napa side and the Sonoma side, well, it's in Napa Valley and it's also in a Sonoma AVA, and there are too many options for clarity. So clarity and context, I think, are incredibly important. Now, TTB's logic in Carneros and in Walla Walla and the Columbia Gorge was that the science, they say these are political boundaries. I mean, we don't care about political boundaries, and they're right in that sense. They are right. The science is correct. But it does, I think, from a consumer point of view, can confuse the matter.
And I would point out that the Oregon regulations that are stricter than the federal regulations specifically recognize this problem. We had a number of people from Walla Walla pointing out that all the wineries are on the Washington side, even if half the vineyards are on the Oregon side, because the regulations allowed more on the Washington side. And so we actually loosened up the Oregon regulations, or labeling regulations, that if you're in a cross-state AVA, you have to conform to whichever rules are, you wish. You don't have to conform to the Oregon regulations if you're on the Oregon side of those.
And I would say from a consumer standpoint, Walla Walla isn't having to wrestle with this as much because they've done a really amazing job of promoting Walla Walla. It's one of, I think, the best examples of how a region can promote itself, and it's one of the most successful in Washington/Oregon. Whereas when I teach about Walla Walla, I don't even necessarily speak to just Washington or Oregon with the specificity, other than talking about Milton Free Water perhaps, but there's a lot of parts of Walla Walla. So we talk about Walla Walla, okay, and then the afterthought is, oh, it's on the Oregon side or it's on the Washington side. It's really just about Walla Walla. And I know that the position of the Washington Wine Commission, in that, because I do a lot of work with them, is that we're just celebrating Walla Walla, and if we're holding a Washington wine event and that fruit and that wine's coming from the Oregon side, it doesn't matter. It's Walla Walla. We're embracing it, and I don't know what the position of Oregon is, but I would assume it's the same thing. So I understand your question for sure, and you're concerned with that. I think it's less of an issue there, probably more so in other cross appellations. Yeah.
So this is going to be a bit of a This is going to be a bit of a softball to Ken, because I know he has strong feelings about this, but I'm curious to get some other opinions on the panel. We all know that a lot of producers in Oregon source fruits or grow fruit in multiple sub-AVAs and then blend a Pinot that's going to be a Willamette Valley designated wine. I think we also know that there's going to be more and more valley floor plantings going forward, which are then also going to be Willamette Valley designated wines. I think we would all agree that those are probably not of equal quality, or in many cases won't be. Sort of long-term going forward, how do we deal with that kind of long-term issue with the Willamette Valley designate and kind of the range in quality and differentiating those for consumers?
Well, thank you. David and I are about to get up in a minute, and we're going to go into detail about that very concern. Suffice to say that we can't change the Willamette Valley AVA as much as we might like to now. But we are, when allowed, we're going to get up and we're going to talk exactly about that concern, because it should be a concern to everybody in this room.
That sort of goes to that pyramid I showed you guys a while ago. So, and obviously it's your choice. Now, in my opinion, the sub-AVAs, the quality coming out of the sub-AVAs should be much higher than the generic Willamette Valley AVA. And I think it is. I think that's happening. But the consumer that knows Willamette Valley AVA, the blended or the generic one, it still should be a delicious and well-made wine. The quality should still be there, but ideally the quality is going to be higher in the sub-AVAs. And the same thing's happening in Napa Valley. I can buy a Napa Valley wine, or I can buy a Rutherford AVA wine, and I'm going to pay a huge difference in price between those two.
Yeah, but these things become self-fulfilling prophecies. What's happened in Napa at $7,000 a ton is that traditional white wine growing areas along the Napa River, deep, fertile valley floor soils, are being planted with extensive drain tiles, a lot of infrastructure, and produce to cab and Bordeaux varietals. Why? Because that's what you have to use to make the entry-level wine that Liz is talking about. So yes, there's a quality differential, but it also allows you to approach the market at various price points. That's just the reality.
And still blend in 15% Lake County cab with it. So, because that's what they do to get those price points. Excuse me, for the consumer.
Right. Bree, do you want to take some other questions from the?
Yeah, is there?
Okay. Yeah.
Let's do that. We'll do 2 minutes of quick questions, and we'll let David. Oh, there's a lot here. So outside of the Willamette, is there any potential for new AVAs currently from the panel?
Yeah, so in my research there was, there was one from Southern Oregon that was, has been proposed and perfected and accepted. Other than that, I couldn't speak to that. So that's what I came across in my research. Is there anyone in the crowd that, I know we have a lot of winemakers. Anyone know of any other petitions or in the works? Petitions in the works, I should say. No? Okay. Are you aware of any?
No, I'm not, and I think
We've got one in South Willamette Valley, right?
Yeah, Mount Pisgah.
No, no,
No.
further south.
Oh, further south. Yeah, I can't remember the name of it. I have it here, but. Yes, thank you.
thank
Long
you.
Tom. Yes, that is the one that has been accepted and perfected as a petition. But other than that, I'm not aware of any. Yeah.
Chris, as you were listing off the attributes of the AVAs and characters of the AVAs that you mentioned, I noticed that you didn't speak to varietal typicity or styles, and that it came from a climate and structural aspect, and perhaps winemaking decisions or growing decisions in those AVAs. So do you think that you can build an AVA brand with multiple varieties?
I think so. Yeah, I think it'll be a little more challenging for sure, especially when there's already an established, priority for Pinot Noir in a lot of these areas. But I think that's what makes it exciting. And on the other side of it is, say, Van Duzer, there's a lot of latitude to grow other varieties. Like Riesling, you could grow Gewürztraminer, you could grow Gruner Veltliner, you could grow, a lot of different things. So I think that's okay. It's just, it gives you the latitude to do different things and maybe set yourself apart from someone that's only doing Pinot Noir, right?
Yeah, I'd like to address that one as well, because the consumer, you've done a great job of linking Pinot Noir to Oregon. Beautiful job. And so consumers come here and they want to taste Pinot Noir. But then there's other things they can, after you taste Pinot Noir, what else can we taste? So having some other varietals is a good thing. And Napa Valley does too. There's great old vine Zinfandel in Napa Valley. There's Riesling even in certain places, and Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So I think it's useful to have some different varietals. And I was just down in Southern Oregon, and there's a lot of diversity there, and I think that's their plan, is to promote diversity. It's actually what Sonoma County did. Sonoma County didn't pick a signature varietal, they just promoted diversity. But what happens is the market ends up deciding for you what you do well. So Sonoma County gets the top prices for its Chardonnay and its Pinot Noir over its Zinfandel and Cabernet. And Napa gets the top prices for its Cabernets. What do you do well? And the market will decide for you. Another thing I wanted to mention is that I do a lot of wine judging all over the nation and even globally, and I have tasted some magnificent Oregon Tempranillos and Malbecs too. So there's some amazing stuff out there that's exciting.
And beyond varietals, there's also the stylistic question, right? Are there really suitable areas for making sparkling wine? Of course, there's already really great examples being made. I see Tony in the audience here. He makes an incredible sparkling wine, and why couldn't there be other areas that can provide delicious fruit for that style, especially when you're looking at Van Duzer or Laurelwood with the higher elevations. So you also take that into consideration too.
Rosé.
Oh yeah, gosh, rosé that's a whole nother seminar. Is rosé
40% market growth rosé.
Rosé is made with purpose.
Yeah.
That's what it's being called now.
I think you go for deodorant.
David and Ken, shall we let you?
Sure.
We're up here together because we've been together so much lately that we are finishing each other's sentences.
So this is a long-prepared seminar. I think we've had a day to get this together. But first of all, I want to mention that this is going to be a quick presentation about the Willamette Valley. So I want to ask, how many of you are not from the Willamette Valley here? Cool. So you could either leave, or hopefully not, because in some respects, your opinions are going to be very important to what we're going to present to you. So how do I make this go forward? Oh, look at that. In 1983, we got the Willamette Valley approved as an AVA, the first AVA in Oregon. The nested AVAs were approved between November 2004 and November 2006. There, as was just said, there are 4 nested AVAs in the Willamette Valley that are proposed now, plus not quite at the perfected stage, one that is nested in a nested AVA. And of course, there are others that people are talking about and thinking about that will be coming along. So if we get to having 20 nested AVAs in the Willamette Valley, could we lose the association between what we started with, the Willamette Valley, and quality? And that really became the reason for this.
Meeting. Thank you. During travels over the last number of years, I became more and more concerned about what Dave created back in '83, and he deserves a hand, by the way, for creating that AVA. David has led the way on a lot of things for our industry. We're really fortunate to have him be part of this industry. It's just fantastic. But that '83 appellation was important. At the time, he probably didn't realize how important it would be. Over the years, we've been so fortunate that we've had so many high-minded, high-character people come to this industry, full of passion, wanting to make great Pinot Noir. They didn't come here to make money. You don't make money making Pinot Noir. Sorry. Not really. I mean, that would not be the path to choose if you're in it for the dollar. But if you love wine, if you love Pinot Noir, the greatest wine variety, then you come here and you pursue something special. And that's what we had. We've had an industry full of people like this, choosing well, great locations, being collegial, willing to share and learn from each other. It's been a remarkable environment, remarkable. And it's led to some fantastic reception around the world. And so today, you know, at the time, stepping back, I'll back up the bus a little. At the time when Dave created the Willamette Valley, it was a great geographical marker, and frankly, we needed it at the time. People didn't know where Oregon was. I mean, anybody that's been marketing Oregon wine since the 70s can tell you that when you called on an account in New York or Miami or Dallas, good luck. They had no idea where. They thought, is Oregon near Montana or Minnesota? They didn't know. It was terrible. So we needed that geographical marker. It was important at the time. We could say, we're from here, this place. And it was great. It got us grounded. But at the time, we didn't really think at the time. I think David, it was a great thing to do, but at the time he wasn't considering how powerful it was, or that there might be people who weren't as high-minded coming to our industry, as passionate about making great Pinot Noir. So over the last few years, it became a concern to me. I was in fact, especially kind of hit home when I was in China, and I was going through Beijing and Shanghai and so forth, and everybody I called on, and it's a great wine market, and becoming so sophisticated so quickly, everybody knew the Willamette Valley. Everybody. To your point, no one knew Yamhill Carlton yet. No one knew Dundee yet. But they knew Willamette Valley. And it just kept hitting home that, you know, we have, in the process of getting so specific in these AVAs, we have forgotten the Willamette Valley. And I think it was, David and I were at a meeting recently with the Willamette Valley Wineries Association, where I think it was Erica Landon was present, And she mentioned that she did a random gathering of 30-some bottles. Jessica, I think you were there. A random gathering of 30 bottles without any intent, just to do a tasting, and found that 32 or 33 did not say Willamette Valley, which is amazing.
Wow.
Amazing. I mean, it is. It's amazing that we have forsaken the Willamette Valley. And so when I came home from China, I started thinking about it, and I ended up calling all these people that you see in that photograph and more. And I expressed my concerns that knowing that most of the Willamette Valley, essentially 90% of it was valley floor, that I was concerned about what might happen going forward as all the choice areas began to be planted. Because you can't stop somebody from using the name Willamette Valley within the boundary. You can't. And so we came up with it was a great discussion. And we came up with a few different ideas. These, I think, are 8 concepts that were discussed, and a result of that meeting. 2 of them, David and I have grabbed hold of. And those are the conjunctive labeling and varietal percent requirement. And I'll let Dave go forward now.
So you have a pretty good idea of what conjunctive labeling is because my patsies here have explained it in great detail. I think it's important to, here it is written out, but I think the important pieces of it, the most important piece is that we think of conjunctive labeling first as what happened in Napa in the late 80s, which required Napa Valley and any sub-AVA next to each other. Well, what happened in Sonoma became eye-opening for us because in Sonoma, you could put the AVA, like here, and Sonoma County. And that didn't require everybody changing their label necessarily. You could add something easily. So, for instance, this is the Willamette Valley auction label, and, right? Huh? A little ploy for the Willamette Valley auction. But it's got a sub-AVA, but it also has Willamette Valley on it. And we were one of the worst offenders, actually, Ken. I mean, all our AVA wines had dropped Willamette Valley off, and we're now in the process of getting it back on for all the reasons that Ken just elaborated and that Emily's laughing about. Okay, so let's move on to the other proposal, if you don't mind.
Yeah. You know, Chris brought up an interesting point, and I so believe in what you said, that we don't need a crutch. And I've believed that from the beginning. You won't find a single French term on my website or in anything I've ever said. If you can say it in English, please do. Because anytime you do use a French term, it's a crutch. And it comes off as if you need the help of another region to prop yourself up. Good God, we do not need the French. Jesus. Seriously. I mean, seriously. I mean, I go back, I could relate some stories from my California days of winemaking in the 70s and 80s. Working with, back in the 70s with Aubert Valland and Jacques Cess, were part of the group that we were with. And you'd be shocked at what America has done, both California and Oregon. We should be incredibly proud of what we've done. In fact, I would say that not only Oregon especially has, I think even more than California, hasn't used crutches. I don't think we've ever labeled a wine Chablis or Burgundy. Just saying.
Thank you.
Just saying. At that meeting, one of the ideas that came forward, that was one that I threw out, was the idea of doing within the Willamette Valley. Would it be positive to us to consider making Pinot Noir and Chardonnay a 100% varietal requirement? 100%. I think people already do, mostly. There might be the odd years where someone may want to throw in something darker, denser, to try and prop up the wine. But I think with our farming methods getting so sophisticated, our ability to protect fruit in the cellar, that's happening less and less. I think it is a great ideal. There are only 2 areas in the world that currently have this, and they're not in France. They're in Spain. It's Albarino from Riojas. Has a 100% requirement, and then also Brunello de Montalcino has 100% requirement. The only 2 in the world. We should join that group, in my opinion. I think we're ready to join that group. And though, Liz, yes, it is great to have these other varieties, and we have some great areas for other varieties, but we have the incredible fortune of being only one of 2 areas that are known for a variety, that are identified with a variety, and that is Napa Valley Cab and Willamette Valley Pinot. And to lose sight of that value that exists worldwide, I think would be incredibly stupid. It's all these people who've come to this point in this industry who've created that value, you're beholden to them. And you're right, it comes down to quality in the end. There has to be this visceral quality that it's compelling and people respond to. And that's what we have. It's like tomatoes from San Marzano, okay? I'm sorry. They're religious. They're amazing. It's like bamboo shoot from Kyoto. Bamboo shoot in Kyoto is the most sublime thing on the planet. Everywhere else it tastes like sawdust. Well, we have Pinot Noir here that inherently wants to be spectacular from these small areas within the valley. It inherently wants to. It's not because we're smart, we're not geniuses, but we have learned how to farm well in order to guarantee that inherent quality that's seen in the bottle. It's a huge thing that we've done in a very short period of time. Sorry, we're running long. So I hope that this area will support a concept of 100% varietal labeling for both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay going forward.
Ken, is there any consideration going into, we're speaking of quality here and 100% Pinot Noir and of maintaining quality, is there anything coming along with farming certifications or adulterations in the winery to protect that quality in conjunction with this labeling, or is this a different certification?
Well, it's not a certification. David's going to address how we would go about making it rule or law. That's the next thing that we want to discuss. There are all these farming certifications, of course, from organic and biodynamic and live and so on that coexist, but are not the same. So Dave, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I realize that we missed this slide, but the question still to be answered is could we propose this, or should we propose this as a rule or a law? You probably know that the current labeling regulations that exist in Oregon are actually an OLCC rule. But I think there's strong reason to follow what California has started doing with the conjunctive labeling, which is doing it via state law, taking it to the legislature, getting it through them and to the governor for a signature. Starting with these 2 items, and we're going to talk about the listening tour here in a moment, but if this makes it through the public opinion piece, taking this to the legislature in the 19 legislative session and introducing this as a state law. Again, all of this is up for consideration. You want to talk about the...
Yeah.
You have 1
so
minute.
One of I'm sorry. So we started doing kind of a listening tour, Dave and I, mostly going to groups, to different trade groups within the valley. And the 2 things that have come up that are very fair concerns, very fair, is what about my rogue vines in the vineyard that aren't Pinot? And what about my cellar help when they accidentally top my Pinot with something that's not Pinot? Very fair concerns. I promise you that in crafting the language of whatever we do, whether it's a rule or a law, in crafting the language, there will be an allowance for this issue. No one's going to be hurt by those issues. What we care about as an industry is someone purposefully coming to the Willamette Valley, on the valley floor, growing 8 tons to an acre of Pinot Noir, making a thin, diluted wine, pumping it up with sugar and color, and putting it out in the world as Willamette Valley Pinot. That is the concern, because if with the volumes of that can happen, that could begin to be the definition of our wine, and that's a problem.
But Ken, that is still 100% Pinot Noir, so are you...
No, it's not.
Are you
No, I would say it's not.
So this is an additive conversation.
It is, without doubt.
And that will be in, so I think that's more important than the actual 100% Pinot Noir consideration at the moment. If we're making 8 tons to the acre but pumping it up with sugar and enzymes or extract or color, then this is an additive conversation. A naturalness.
Well, that's part of
wine.
it, but the 100% is an ideal that I think we are ready for.
So what happened if we face another 2011 vintage? Because I mean, obviously in 2011 we had to use sugar to be able to make a wine that is not possible to have like some mouthfeel.
So the question was about 2011, and obviously you needed to add sugar. I'm not talking about anything that's added during the fermentation process, such as water or sugar. That's not touched. We're not touching winemaking, that kind of winemaking, at all. What we're talking about is just that the varietal is 100% Pinot. Pinot, there are acylated tannins that Pinot Noir does not have. That's why it's an easy test. It's stupid easy. It's very cheap. Other varieties, it's not cheap. Pinot Noir is the only one that is cheap, honestly, to test. And so but we would never prohibit the addition of sugar. Like you say, I agree with you, absolutely. There are years that warrant a sugar addition. There are years that warrant an acid addition. None of that would be touched. It's only, all we're talking about is truth in labeling. And if someone wants to add Pinot Noir, to Pinot Noir, if they want to add Syrah, go ahead, that's okay. And if that's your way of making wine, it's totally fine. Just don't call it Willamette Valley Pinot Noir. Call it what it is. Yeah.
Should we have a discussion then about the possibility of actual ingredient labeling on all of our wines?
Well, that's coming, I'm sure. Oh, I'm sorry. Discussion about ingredient labeling?
Yes. So we not only cover the concern about the varietal purity, but also cover the concern about what's in it. If you're using a concentrator, your winery dish to actually dehydrate the wine to actually make it more colorful, which is not necessarily worse than adding some Syrah to the same thing. We can just kind of eliminate a lot of this stuff by actually, I think, just doing some sort of voluntary or possibly even voting on some kind of Willamette Valley appellation sort of criteria that actually has to.
Well, you have a couple questions going in there. So we're talking about ingredient labeling. Richard, you guys aware of you're probably the most...
Well, ingredient labeling has been on the back burner at TTB for 3 decades, and it's never come off the back burner, meaning that it continues to be a concern because wine is a food product and it's not subject to the same rules as other food products in terms of ingredient labeling. But I don't know of any immediate resurgence of that topic. TTB has enough going on. Liz, if you know otherwise.
Well, not in the U.S., but of course ingredient labeling is occurring in other parts of the world, especially in Europe. And I think New Zealand, too, is looking at it. So it's on the horizon, but as Richard says, I don't think the TTB has taken it off the back burner yet in this country.
And unfortunately, we do need to wrap up because we are moving into lunch. So if David wants to flick onto the next slide, which gives the information about the listening tour. And
it's right there.
Yeah.
And we've thrown out a lot of stuff that could be potentially controversial. I'm glad that those of you who are from outside the Willamette Valley were willing to stay and listen to this. If you've got questions about what we're doing, if any of you have questions, We'll be up here for a couple of minutes. We'll be here for the next couple of days. You're welcome to come and tell us we're full of bunk, or that you want to see this go forward, or something in between. But I thank you very much for your being willing to be part of this conversation today.
Thank you to our panelists as well for their participation.